Hello, everyone. As you may know, today is the first sermon in our new sermon series, Big and Perplexing Questions. But what you don't know is that Hubble actually inspired this sermon. If you are new to Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church, or you are viewing online and are at home, Hubble is the first dog that I've ever met that actually comes to church. And he's sitting over there right now. Very sweet. So like I said, a dog coming to church was very new for me. Something that was also new for me was a few summers ago, I moved to the Middle East. Now, in the Middle East, there are cats and dogs everywhere. And I don't mean they're in malls and restaurants and mosques and churches, but they're on the streets everywhere. The big difference for me, however, was how people reacted to these animals. So you see, in a predominantly Islamic society, cats are known for their cleanliness and their worthiness. They're actually talked a lot about by Prophet Muhammad. On the other hand, dogs are seen as the complete opposite. Dogs are called dirty, contaminated, and even sometimes haram, which in Islam means prohibited or unlawful. It is very controversial because the religious teachings in the Quran mention nothing about cats or dogs. However, Prophet Muhammad said quite a lot to say about the animals. So I first learned about all of this sitting back in a classroom, and my Jordanian teacher walked in. At the time, a peer was showing off pictures of her little dog, I think it was a schnauzer, back at home. And my teacher, she was floored, almost disgusted. She could not believe that this dog was allowed in the house, let alone that my peer cuddled with it. It was crazy. So I continued living in the Middle East. I made lots of friends, some who were lesser practicing Muslims, and also some Jordanian Christians. While there, dogs came up in conversation quite a lot, if you can imagine, but everyone gave a very similar reaction. People were quite disgusted or unsure of these canines. And that confused me. Was this cultural or is this religious? So this brings me to today's big question. What is the difference between culture and religion? In this example with the dogs, Islam said no. But because the society was predominantly Islamic, this had been encapsulated into the culture, as the people were also saying no to dogs. Further, more and more Muslims are beginning to own dogs in the West and in the Middle East, as culture is accepting it more and more. So culture is defined as the behaviors and social norms in a society. This includes beliefs, thoughts, laws, customs, food, music, etc. Yet, if I were to survey the room right now, I think every single person would describe the American culture as being slightly different. See, everyone has a different perspective. And of course, these aspects of our lives, they're constantly changing, making defining a culture seemingly impossible. Culture evolves as the humans in it develop. But where does that leave religion? So religion can include a variety of beliefs and practices towards a supreme being or beings. Like in America or the Middle East, one religion may be the majority and bleed into the politics, communities, and the culture. This means that religion is a subset of culture. Now I'm going to be frank with you. Culture in the United States is complicated. Culture itself is very complicated, let alone with religion also playing a role. For example, the American culture is rapidly changing, has many undefinable aspects of it, and consists of a variety of religious backgrounds. But you are not required to be of one certain faith in order to be in the American religion or American culture. So many religions can make up a culture, yet a religion is not defined by the culture of its believers. That is to say, not all Christians are required to live in America in order to be a follower of Christ. So the American culture, that being said, how does religion, predominantly Christianity, in the United States impact culture? So let's take a look at December. December is a month for a lot of people where you're creating New Year's resolutions, you're finishing up a semester or a year of work, and Christmas. So the American culture is in part still Christian. And we know this because of how hard it is to put up a menorah in a time that is dominated by Christmas trees. Or you may hear Christmas carols more frequently than you would the call to prayer if you were in an Islamic society. So the culture that you're getting when you walk into the United States is partially a Christian culture that you were forced into, a Christian supremacy that makes it easy to be Christian and hard to be anything else. So now this brings us to the Gospel of John. In chapter 15, Jesus is having the Last Supper with his disciples. So what if you were one of the 12 chosen disciples sitting at this table with Jesus? Well, you pretty much are, except you're sitting at pews, or you're at home, sitting on the couch, or wherever you may be. Yet just as Jesus told his disciples then, he's still telling us the same thing now. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. Keep in mind that it hated Jesus first. The world, and at the time, more specifically the Roman Empire and the Roman general Pontius Pilate, did not like that Jesus was calling himself the Messiah and that he was proclaiming the teachings of God. At this time, during Jesus' arrest, it was actually Passover. And if you're not super familiar with Passover, Passover is the Jewish tradition celebrating the Israelites escaping from the Egyptians, and it's normally celebrated with feasting and sacrifices made for the Messiah to come. So with Jesus walking around in a predominantly Jewish nation, calling himself the Messiah, and during the time of Passover, you can imagine how unpopular he really was. This unpopularity came with being the irregular, the minority, and the different religion. Christians, Jesus, and his disciples were clearly not favored. Yet today, in America, Christians are favored. The Christian connotations are implemented into our pledge, the courtrooms, even somehow cussing. The Bible here gives us privilege of not only God, but of society. And during the time of Jesus' crucifixion, he and other Christians and the disciples had anything but privilege. Christianity was not a part of the major religion or the traditions, and therefore was not a part of the culture of Jerusalem. So there are many parts of the world that will discriminate against you based on your religion. For example, we can see that very much translated into Islamophobia and also anti-Semitism. On the other hand, what if you also discriminate against the culture of Christianity? For example, the stereotypical Christian in Utah is generally a Mormon, and Mormons are joked at, stereotyped, and called ugly names, just as people do the same to those who are Jewish. Another modern example would include the stereotypes of born-again Christians to be radically right-winged or a biblical fundamentalist. Does choosing a better path or right way make you able to judge and fear another group? So if you're feeling this pressure and this fear, Jesus knows, as it happened to him and his disciples on the night of his arrest. Jesus, in his teaching about hatred, pretty much sums up what the disciples must be feeling during this time: fear of hatred and fear of being hated. Jesus goes on saying, "If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also." So let that sink in. Before his own persecution, Jesus warns the disciples of it, a fate to come if they're truly believers and followers of him. So imagine sitting in this room after hearing your teacher calling out his death and being arrested, and then saying, because you followed him, you are also going to be persecuted. Wow, I almost feel really bad for the disciples, but I would be terrified out of my mind. So now you're probably wondering, what does Peter have to do with all of this? Well, Peter was sitting at the Last Supper. He was there listening to Jesus, and he was, most likely, also terrified. So this brings us to the story of Peter denying Jesus. In chapter 18, it says that a servant girl approached Peter and asked him about his affiliations with Jesus. And what did Peter do? He denied it. Later, more servants and guards asked Peter about Jesus. He goes on to deny it. For the third and final time, civilians are asking Peter about Jesus, and he denies it. So why did Peter deny Jesus? Shortly before, Jesus had told Peter and the other disciples who had followed him that they would be persecuted. Given the circumstances, Jesus in this moment was just arrested. And in a time of Roman rule, this did not look good for the future of Christianity. So, out of fear, one of the most faithful was ready to defy God. Put yourself in Peter's shoes. How did Peter's fear of society, fear of the world that would hate him for loving Jesus, define his religion? In this moment, death would have been the penalty for following Christ. So I'm asking you, have you ever hidden away as a Christian, afraid of the penalty for being a follower of Jesus? Is Christianity a label you do not want to be defined as, out of fear for being associated with other Christians or other Christian groups? If someone on the streets asked if you were a Christian, would your answer be very different during the 2008 election versus the 2020 election? And this is the question: how do religion and culture relate to one another? Even over 2,000 years ago, believers were struggling to live like Jesus in a culture dominated by the Roman Empire. Does living like Jesus mean standing against culture? And if so, what parts of culture are we to stand against in our faith? When God calls us to love all, are you able to bypass society telling you to not love those who are incarcerated, queer, or perhaps even a teen mom? Or are you one of those people scared, just like Peter, because living like how Jesus lived could put us all at the odds for being hated and persecuted? Or perhaps you want to deny your faith because we have become too much of an American culture that says there's only one type of Christian, and that one type of Christian is a Christian supremacist. Through these questions, thoughts, doubts, and fears, we come to the point that although culture and religion are different, religion can be influenced by culture, and culture can be influenced by religion. If those two are connected, then leaning into your religion, a religion that is more loving and accepting, will also impact culture to then also become more loving and accepting. So I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Imagine a world where you're not ashamed to identify and live as a Christian. A world where Christianity is known to be firmly on the side of those who are downtrodden, left out, and forgotten. Imagine living and claiming Christianity boldly because instead of the culture equating Christians as racist, they'll be known as the anti-racist. If you can imagine it, you can create it. Amen.